Thank you for joining us for this Local Decision 2015 Candidate Spotlight. I'm Ben Hale, and I'm glad to be sitting down with Melissa Maher, who is a candidate for Lino Lakes City Council. Melissa, thanks for coming in tonight and sharing some of your views with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, let's just start with giving you a chance to kind of introduce yourself and tell us, why did you decide to run for this office?
Well, my name is Melissa Maher, and I am running for Lino Lakes City Council. I had actually run for council 2 years ago and ended up losing just by 2 votes to Councilmember Bill Custerman. And after that, I was even more determined to come back and run again. And a lot of things have changed in the city, so there's a lot of exciting things to do now. And I'm really excited to be out here running and hopefully get elected this time so I can help get in there and help guide the city in a good direction.
Thank you. Well, let's start by talking about public safety, because it's kind of been the polarizing issue of this campaign, I think it's safe to say.
Yes.
Let's start with a question of, why do you oppose Lino Lakes leaving the Centennial Fire District and then creating the fire division of the Lino Lakes Department of Public Safety?
Well, the reason that I oppose that decision is, first and foremost, it was a decision that was so acrimonious within the surrounding communities and within our own citizens in Lino Lakes that I really feel there should have been much more discussion and much more of a presence by the city explaining why they did what they did and explaining why it came up so very abruptly. And for the last, good 10 years, we've been winning awards for what a wonderful department the Centennial Fire Department is, and everything seemed to be going so well, and people have done nothing but praise the department, and all of the sudden Lino Lakes withdrew. And I think that was a decision that was met with such opposition that opposition really needed more of a response than we got from the current administration, and that is why I oppose the decision.
So moving forward, under the new public safety model, do you believe that Lino Lakes residents will be as safe, safer, or not as safe under this new fire service?
I'm hoping that we'll be as safe. I think there is some potential to be not as safe, and that worries me not just from the standpoint of somebody running for council, but from the standpoint that I live here with my children in Lino Lakes. Well, we're in Blaine, but I live in Lino Lakes with my children. Training is changing. There won't be quite the same level of training that our previous department members received under when we were with Centennial Fire. And so there are some training differences, and there are some location distances, some distant differences. And those things could unfortunately add up to some service that isn't quite as good. I really hope not, but there is potential there for that danger.
Let's move on and talk about budget. Looking at the city budget in Lino Lakes, the preliminary levy that was passed by the council at the end of September, if that becomes the final levy in December, Lino Lakes residents would see a tax levy increase of 5.34%, and which would be the second year in a row of a more than 5% increase. If you had been on the council, would you have supported that type of an increase?
Our taxes have remained stable for so many years, until last year, that I probably would have supported that increase, because our taxes are still fairly low here comparatively to what they could be. And our council has done a very good job trying to keep the taxes as low as possible and trying to keep them stable. And that is something that they have worked hard at, and they have maintained taxes for quite some time. So I think a 5% increase, well, no increase would be better, but I think in terms of what we will get from the levy, that a 5% increase isn't much to pay in terms of a tax increase.
Digging a little deeper on the budget, the original budget estimate for next year that was prepared by the city staff called for a more than 18% tax levy hike. This number was brought down through cost cutting, through using over $300,000 from fund reserve balances, and then also by transferring $1 million from the closed bond fund. Does using this type of stockpiles of funds, reserve funds, make you worry about higher levy amounts in the future once those funds are depleted and those one-time monies are not there?
Yes, it does. When we're dealing with budgets and taxes, the last thing you want to see in any year is a big jump. either way, really. I mean, if we have a big dip, there's usually some bad news coming after that. So we don't want to see any big jumps or big dips. And when we're looking at a relatively modest 5% increase, that's not a big jump. It's getting to the point where any higher, and it might be a little worrisome, but 5% is not what I would consider a huge jump. 18%, on the other hand, is a number that puts into my mind that there has been some poor long-range planning on the part of the current administration, which is why we would be in this situation in the first place. Because yes, once that money is gone, it's gone. And we don't need 18% even suggested jumps in our taxes in the future.
Let's move on and talk about development a little bit. Mm-hmm. If you were on the city council, are there certain types of development or redevelopment that you would advocate for in the city?
Yes, I definitely would advocate for some commercial redevelopment. We have prime commercial areas that are not being utilized. We have buildings that are not being utilized, and we have open land that could be developed commercially, which would be a wonderful thing to see in this community. And when I say commercial development, I'm not talking about gas stations or liquor stores. I'm talking about businesses that give jobs and growth to this community. Not necessarily retail establishments, but things along the lines of manufacturing, or, not that retail establishments don't give jobs to the community, because they do. Grocery stores are a wonderful thing. But I would really definitely look in the direction of some commercial redevelopment at this point.
Are there things in terms of residential development that you'd like to see? Do you think that there are a number of projects planned for different spots in Lino Lakes? Are there types of residential developments that you would favor more than others potentially for the city?
For our city, for the population that lives out here, I would not favor developments that have multifamily housing. I just think that isn't necessarily the direction that we need to go. Single-family homes are really what our community is built on. That's the population that generally lives out here, are people who would normally expect to live in a single-family home. I'm not in favor of high-density housing, so I think that we would need to be very careful looking at things like that. And in terms of housing developments, it's great to have housing developments. I think the ones that are currently in progress and the ones shortly to be in progress have been quite well planned and should be a good addition to our community. But I think in terms of broadening our tax base and taking some of the brunt off individual homeowners, we really need to focus more on commercial development and redevelopment than on housing, and in the next few years at least.
Okay. Let's talk about roads, as we might say that public safety is a hot button issue this year. Many other years it's roads in Lino Lakes. And when it comes to repairing or upgrading those roads, as a council member, what steps would you take to make sure that roads get fixed when they need to get fixed?
Well, currently the city has a pavement management plan in place. They have a system, and I admit that I'm not super familiar with how the system works that they assess roads, but there is an assessment measure where they determine at what point roads need to be rebuilt, either just fixed or actually rebuilt depending on their condition, and it's based on a scale that's used in the pavement management plan. As long as that is a reasonable way to assess whether the streets need repair, I am willing to stick with that plan. And I just think that we need to make sure that the streets that are in really bad condition are getting redone. And not only that, but the streets that aren't in bad condition, we need to be maintaining those roads so they don't end up being at the end of their lifespan before we need to replace them.
When it comes to the levy question, when it comes to street reconstruction, what are your thoughts on that? When is it appropriate for, if you were on the city council, would you look to make changes in the charter? Would you look to go about levies in a different way? Where would you lie on that issue?
I absolutely would not make changes to the charter. The charter is the one thing the citizens of Lino Lakes have that protects them in terms of unwanted road reconstruction that we don't need. A lot of people say that people won't vote for your road. I don't believe that. I think that as communities, when we all have to drive on roads, we may not all live on a certain street, but in the grand scheme of things, that street will somehow impact our life. And I don't believe that people won't vote for your road, because I don't think that we're doing road reconstruction that is unnecessary. And once it comes to a public vote, people know that really needs to be done. And I think the protections afforded in our charter are ones that are a basic necessity for us living here. And I definitely would not go to change the charter. And I think that a public referendum is the appropriate way to approach any big road reconstruction project.
When you think about the role of a council member, if you were to sit on the city council, what would you think of as your most important responsibilities?
First and foremost, the most important responsibility that a council person has is responsibility to the people that elected them, to the citizens of this city, and not to the people who elected them, because whether the people who voted for you, that's great. You need to definitely be responsive to them, but the people who didn't vote for you are still depending on you. So first and foremost, that role is to be responsive to the citizens. And that role also encompasses being a good ambassador, so to say, in terms of dealing with the neighborhood communities and other professionals that we come in contact with in the workings of the city government. So that role of a council member is one to basically hold yourself out there as a part of Lino Lakes and conduct yourself accordingly, making sure that you're being respectful and listening to people and doing the right thing and keeping things moving in the right direction.
We talked a little bit about development earlier, but to kind of broaden that out, are there amenities that you think that the city is lacking currently, or that you would like to see come into Lino Lakes for the residents?
I would love to see a community center. Actually, if I currently had my way, I would love to see the YMCA be a community center rather than a Y with a big outdoor pool. But the reason the Y doesn't have an outdoor pool is far too complicated to talk about now. But I would love to see a community center with a pool in Lino Lakes. I think that'd be wonderful. But amenities that we have a lot of, but just we need some additions, are bike trails. They're the best thing. We are so fortunate out here, but there are some really isolated areas of Lino still that have a difficult time getting to the bike trails. And so I think we need to focus on putting in some trails so the isolated parts that are not connected to the trails can actually get safely to the trails, so that families and children can get, to the YMCA, for example. And, I think that there are areas we need to connect that aren't currently connected.
In our last minute or so, final question for you to kind of sum it up here. Just why should a resident of Lino Lakes vote for you on Election Day?
Because I have the experience and the diplomacy necessary to work with diverse groups of people to get things done and keep things moving in the right direction. That's why I would be great on the council for Lino Lakes.
Well, Melissa, thank you for taking some time today to come in here and have a chat with us about your views on the issues. Thank you for doing that.
Thanks so much, Ben. It was great to see you again.
All right. Well, I want to remind all of you that you can always head to northmetrotv.com, where you can catch any of our local decision coverage. Candidate biographies and other spotlights like this one are all available right there on northmetrotv.com. I've been your host, Ben Hale. Thank you.